Hey guys, so I don't have a fictional story for you today, unfortunately. However, I do have a true story. One about a cat. My cat, Peridot. I thought it would be fitting, seeing as the subject of the piece I am drawing before you is indeed a cat, and Peridot's story is a bit of a wild ride. More so for her than me, but you'll understand that in a minute. To preface this story, I live in Minnesota. And if there's one thing you should know about Minnesota, it's that the winters here are cold and unpredictable. On December 15th, 2016, that was definitely the case. Our wind chill temperatures were at about negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, while the actual temperature was at around negative 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Still dangerous for a lot of animals and people, especially with prolonged exposure. And me being me, I had just spent the entire day in my bedroom, warm and cozy, playing video games and drawing. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. It was just a normal day. And then somewhere around 7:30 or 8 p.m., I think it was, I got a call from my best friend. Now, she worked at Menards at the time. And if you knew my friend, you would know that she would never call anybody in the middle of her shift unless there was an emergency. So, knowing that my friend was at work that day and getting a phone call from her was alarming. And what she told me was that there was a couple of guests who had come in with this black and white kitten, trying to find somebody or anybody who could take the cat. They had just driven in from a town that was about an hour away, give or take a few minutes, and when they got out of their vehicle, heard meowing, and out came this tiny scrap of a kitten from the undercarriage of their vehicle. So they assumed that she had hitched a ride that entire way, and they didn't really have the facilities to take care of this cat. They had come into town to, I don't remember exactly what, but it was something important, and there was no way that they could take care of the cat in the meantime. There was no way that they could try to foster it while they tried to find either the original owners or someone to adopt the cat. It just wasn't going to happen. Wasn't going to work. So eventually they found my friend, and she said that she would take the cat. No questions, just, yep, I will take her. No worries. I've got somebody that can probably come pick her up. Let's just get her out into my vehicle. I will leave it running for now, and then I will go from there. No worries about it. So that's kind of where I come in, because the next thing that she did, which is 100% logical, is she called me and she said, "Hey, we've got a problem. So here's what's going on. Can you just come get this cat from my vehicle and bring it to my dad's house?" Of course, I wasn't gonna say no, so I just grabbed one of our cat carriers and went out to Menards. It was about 15 minutes away from my house, so it wasn't a terribly long time to wait or anything. But when I got there, I truly didn't expect to see a tiny black and white tuxedo cat that looked almost exactly like the cat that my fiance and I had adopted in November of 2015 while I was in Australia, to be staring at me through the car window of my best friend's vehicle. The only difference between this tiny kitten in front of me and the cat that Patrick and I had adopted, who we named Jasper, was the color of their eyes. This little kitten had gorgeous green eyes, whereas Jasper had eyes that were more of an amber or hazel color. And I won't lie to you, I fell in love with Peridot immediately. I don't have any clue if part of it is because she looked so much like Jasper and I was missing Jasper fiercely, or if it was just legitimately fate that I loved her as much as I did. But I started falling in love with her and damn near cried when I took this tiny little kitten out of my friend's vehicle and put her into the cat carrier that was in my vehicle. Of course, being a good friend, I then kept my own vehicle running while I brought my friend's keys back to her and locked her car before heading off with this cat. But I didn't really do a lot of checks or once-overs until I got this kitten to my friend's dad's house. And, let's just clarify, because Dad wasn't home. I don't know where Dad was. I don't ask questions, but Dad was not home. So it was just me, this tiny little cat, and the cat that my friend already had, Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs was also a kitten at the time, and he wasn't really thrilled when I walked through the door with this cat carrier that had another cat in it. But I didn't really care all that much because, not my cat. He can get along. It's fine. And after they had sniffed each other through the door of the carrier for a little bit, that's when I decided to let Peridot out, at least supervised. I didn't really let her leave the living room. I didn't want her to decide to go into a bedroom and pee all over the floor or anything. But I just wanted to give her a once-over, and she didn't seem really interested in leaving my side at all. She seemed really kind of exhausted, which, if the story about her being in the undercarriage of a moving vehicle for over an hour, I don't blame her in the slightest. But she just seemed a little scruffy. If you've ever been around a cat that's been sick, they kind of get this puffiness around their eyes, and that was definitely something that Peridot had as well. And she was fairly skinny. She was small enough that I thought that she was maybe 3 or 4 months old. And first of all, that is way too small for a kitten to be out on its own 100% of the time. Second of all, what a traumatizing thought of, a cat riding in the undercarriage of a vehicle and surviving, which is incredible. But, it's just a crazy thing. It was crazy to see, crazy to witness. And the fact that she was still in fairly good shape was astonishing. That's what cast doubt in my mind. That was the part where I was like, I don't think this cat would be this okay if she had ridden in the undercarriage of a vehicle. But more on that later. Let's get back to Miss Peridot. So after I did the once-over, I went and grabbed a can of tuna out of my friend's pantry so that I could give her something to eat. The food that they had for Mr. Biggs was just dry food, and considering the fact that if this cat had been out on her own, she probably was a little dehydrated as well, is why I chose the tuna. They didn't have any wet food, so, whatever. Sorry guys for stealing your tuna, but she was hungry, and that much was obvious. She was very calm though, and she seemed very grateful to be somewhere that was warm and safe. And I also thought that there was probably a family out there that was missing her very much, especially since she seemed so well behaved. As I continued to hang out with this tiny little thing, I was brainstorming some ideas for what we were going to call her if she didn't already have an owner. One of the first things that came to mind was the name Peridot, mostly because the cat that Patrick and I had adopted was named Jasper, and they looked so similar outside of their eye color. And of course, yes, I know that the stone is usually pronounced Peridot, but I decided that Peridot would be a more fitting name for a cat, or at least that pronunciation of it. My dad teases me mercilessly about that still, but you know what, whatever. Thanks, Dad. I love you. But in any case, in my head, I was already starting to call this cat Peridot because it seemed like it was the only name that fit. A few hours later, when my friend finally came home from work, the first thing that she did was burst straight through the front door and go, "Can we name her Peridot?" And I was floored. I had no idea how to react. Outside of being all like, yeah, you know what? That is exactly the same thing I was thinking. I think it's fate that she's named Peridot. It was just one of those crazy coincidences. I hadn't said anything to my friend outside of texting her to let her know that I got to her house with the cats. So the fact that both of us had the same idea without even communicating was just beautiful, if you ask me. And it seemed, like I said, like fate that she was going to be named Peridot. Of course, then my friend was asking all of these questions, how's everything going? What kind of condition is she in? I was the quote unquote resident expert at that point because of the kittens that I had raised in my house a while back, years before actually, and then of course my experiences with raising Jasper while I was in Australia. I gave her the once over. I explained everything that was going on with her, how she seemed to be just kind of tired and really in good shape considering the story that we were told by the people who brought her into Menards. But then we also went over some other details. So what were we going to do about getting her to a vet, trying to find if she had owners out there somewhere, etc., etc. Eventually, as the night went on, I started to vocalize a little bit about how I was falling in love with this tiny little thing, which I was trying to not do because I was trying to be like, this is my friend's cat. I have cats at home. I have 5 cats at home. I cannot bring home another. But when I told her that I wished I could bring this little thing home, she just said, "Why don't you ask your mom?" Duh, why don't I just ask my mom? And in my head I'm going, because I know she's gonna say no, but at the same time, something about the idea of bringing Peridot home with me just felt so insanely right that I couldn't ignore it. So I messaged my mom and I went, "Hey, so, you know how I went to Menards to pick up that cat to bring back to my friend's house? How much trouble would I be in if I brought that cat home?" And I could feel the tension from there. I swear, my mom was just so, I think disgruntled would be the proper word, that I could practically feel it from, a 10-minute drive away. But I just couldn't back down. I couldn't take no for an answer. My mom was asking all these questions and she's like, "Why can't they take it? She's the one that blah, 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 blah." And I just stopped her and I was like, "Mom, something about this just feels right to bring her home, okay? I don't care if you guys consider it like a solstice gift or whatever. I feel like I need to bring this cat home." And I went without getting a reply for a little bit, and then I got a very hesitant, "Your dad is going to kill me, but okay." And I was ecstatic. I was so happy. I was like, "Oh my god, yes, I get to bring this cat home. Woohoo!" And, I spent a little bit longer talking to my friend and gushing about this tiny little cat that I was so enamored with, and my friend mentioned how we seemed really drawn to each other and whatnot, and it just seemed right that Peridot be my cat, which I thought was amazing. I will never have the words to properly commend my friend for her generosity and her understanding. She's an amazing person. But in any case, after we had talked about this for a little while, I started to notice that it was starting to get really late. And it was also starting to snow, which was a really not good sign. And of course, the wind had picked up a bit, and I'm thinking, oh crap. I have no litter pan for this little thing. I have litter pans for my other cats, but I don't have one to have in my bedroom while this cat is in isolation. For those of you that don't know, usually when you bring a new animal home, you want to keep them in isolation for at least 10 days. And I also wanted to have the opportunity to bring her to the vet and have tests done for like FIV and other transmittable diseases, just to make sure that I wasn't bringing anything terrible into my house without being informed about it. But in any case, I needed a litter pan. I also needed food dishes. So I packed up this tiny little thing and we drove out to the nearest Walmart, which was about 25, I think, minutes away, something like that. And of course there's snow blowing and visibility isn't all that great. It's not a whiteout, but it was one of those things where you're driving through the snow and there's snow blowing and you're going, why did I choose to do this? This is so annoying. That was definitely one of those moments, but I had this tiny cat that I needed to take care of, so I really had no choice. When I got to Walmart, and by the way, I had made sure to crank the heat as much as possible. I didn't really want to leave my car running at the Walmart parking lot for reasons. But in any case, I cranked the heat, made sure that it was really hot and toasty in there, and then made my trip into Walmart as quick as possible. Just grabbed the essentials, went back out. Cat was fine. We drove back to my house, which was about 20 minutes away. And of course, you know, my mom was all like, oh my god, okay, let me see this cat. Oh my gosh, she's so cute. You know, the thing that parents do. You know the thing. And after that, you know, I explained everything that happened. I was saying, you know, she looks like she's maybe 3 or 4 months old. I don't know. That's just how she looks based off of, you know, her build and everything, but we need to get her into a vet. So within the next week or so, I got her to the vet. She was not microchipped. She tested negative for FIV and the other tests that I had run. She seemed to be in fairly good condition, all things considered, but she was actually 6 months old. But she was like right around 4 pounds, so she was 2 pounds lighter than she should have been. For those of you that don't know, for roughly at least like the first 6-7 months or so, kittens generally gain about 1 pound every month, and she was definitely well below that. She should have been closer to 6 pounds at that point, and she was right at around like 3.8, 4 pounds. Lots of growing to do for this little one. So, of course, I first had her on some wet food just to make sure she was getting enough into her system, and then switched her over to half dry food, half wet food. And the vet had actually suggested that I leave her overnight after that first visit just so that she could get spayed, which I agreed to. And let me tell you, keeping her from tearing her stitches out was a nightmare. Absolute nightmare, because I didn't get a cone from the vet and I didn't buy a cone. And yeah, not fun. I actually had to take one of my tank tops and modify it so that she had like this little shirt to wear, just to try to keep the area covered, because she managed to tear out one of her stitches within the first 24 hours while I was sleeping. Great stuff. But in any case, so got her spayed immediately. Like I said, she wasn't microchipped. I had no feedback on any of the posts I made on Facebook trying to find if she had an owner, so I decided to officially adopt her. And it's been a bit of a journey since then. She went through a period of time after her spaying surgery where she had a really nasty skin infection, and my vet thought it might have been bacterial, but it could have also been due to food. And when it wasn't really responding to the initial treatment, I mean, it was a little bit, but not a lot, before going ahead and buying $800 worth of medicine for a different treatment, I decided to switch her food and see how she reacted to that. When I switched her to a high quality grain-free food, she cleared up almost immediately. Like, the difference was astounding. And even today, if she gets into enough products that have grain in them, she will get little scabs like she had before. The first time she had massive scabs, like well over the size of a quarter. Just big, massive red scabs. It was really gross. But eventually we got that all cleared up, and now she's a regular member of our family. She still doesn't get along with some of the cats because some of the older girls are kind of resistant to change and don't like Peridot very much. But for all intents and purposes, she's very much a solid part of our family and very comfortable, at least upstairs. She's kind of claimed the whole second floor is hers, and the first floor is for our other cats, essentially. But there is one thing that has continued to stand out to me over the years, and that is her hypervigilance. For those of you that aren't familiar with hypervigilance, it's where you're kind of on guard all the time. You are constantly hyper aware of your surroundings, you look for changes, you're unsteady and uneasy, and that is definitely something that comes across in Peridot. This happens in a few different ways. The first of those ways is she's afraid of everything if it is different from how it was before. So even if she just walks into my bedroom, which is where her prime residence is, and I have, like if I've left a plastic bag on my bed, she will approach it as if it is something lethal, and will continue to act like that until she has thoroughly investigated it. That kind of behavior happens with everything in the house. So when my parents, for example, decided to rearrange the living room and the addition, we had to make sure that Peridot was kind of told what was going on to an extent. It's hard to communicate with cats like that, but what we would do is just try to reassure her that everything was okay, that she wasn't going to get hurt, etc., etc. That seemed to help a little bit, as well as, constant petting and treats and whatnot. And she's taken to this recent change quite well, but in the past, she hasn't taken that change very well at all. And she also is deathly terrified of anything with a running motor. Vacuum cleaners was a challenge, and she's still terrified of them, but not nearly to the extent that she was, 3.5 years ago. She has slowly learned how to, at least, that she's okay walking away from them and they're not going to chase her or anything. She understands that, but she still doesn't like to be around them. If it looks like it's coming toward her, she will absolutely freak out. And I'm not talking your typical, freak out type thing. I'm talking she legitimately shakes. She has this just awful, terrified look in her eyes. It's really quite scary. And of course, she's not fond of cars either, but she tolerates cars better if she's not in a carrier. If she's in a carrier, she flips out, and I think part of that is because of her very likely trauma, as well as some other factors. But for the most part, I keep her on a harness and a leash if I have to take her anywhere. It just seems to work out better for all of us. So there's a lot to unpack there in terms of what I believe to be PTSD. We don't have an official diagnosis. A lot of her symptoms are fairly mild, but we have done our best to make sure that she isn't anxious, and she has grown into quite the confident little thing. And for the most part, she doesn't display any symptoms at all. The one thing that I have noticed is that occasionally, once every maybe 6 months to a year, she hasn't had many of these episodes, but she will be sleeping and she will suddenly wake up absolutely terrified, and she will just hiss right off the bat. The other night we had an episode like that where she woke up with a start, almost as if like something had bitten her, you know what I mean? Like just that sudden, what the hell? And then she hissed, and she seemed really kind of out of it for a minute there, really dazed, didn't really know what was going on, didn't seem to know where she was. And I eventually got her to come over to me, and I gave her a couple of pets, and then she started meowing and walked back to her bed and laid down. So being the overly concerned cat mom that I am, I pulled her bed over to where I was and just sat there petting her and making sure that she was okay. Generally, she doesn't have many episodes like that, and that was definitely one of the worst. And then of course there have been a couple of times when she's playing either alone or with a person, where she will just randomly hiss, and we haven't really been sure why. But I do know that at least with her, with what seemed to be like nightmares, that could definitely possibly be linked to a PTSD episode. So for all of you out there, I really do hope that you can take the few minutes to just check your vehicles before you leave, especially in the colder months. All it takes is a few wraps against the outside of your car, on your car hood, on your trunk, just to make sure that any animals that are in there can have a chance to get out before you actually start the engine. There are many cases of animals dying because they are stuck in engines, especially over the colder months where they're looking for somewhere warm to be. And then of course with Miss Peridot, I fully believe her story after all these years. After seeing how she behaves and her weird trauma reactions to things, or at least what look like trauma reactions to things, I am fairly convinced that she did ride in the undercarriage of a car for over an hour. And I sincerely hope that that doesn't happen to a lot of other animals, because it's a terrifying thing. Imagine being a tiny, barely 4 pounds cat who just went to this vehicle because, oh my gosh, it was warm and it was bitterly cold outside. And then you end up somewhere else and you have no idea how you got there, and you endured an hour of just loud noises and rattling and hanging on for dear life and not knowing what to do. It's a terrifying prospect. So, in the hopes that you all will check your vehicles before you leave in the colder months, please, all it takes is an extra minute of your time, and it can prevent something like this from happening again. While I do believe that Peridot was brought to me by fate, and I wouldn't change it for the world, I definitely don't want this to happen to other animals if it can be prevented. Because as much as her symptoms are mild, the trauma that Peridot was put through does still affect her on a fairly daily basis. And I would never wish that on another living being. But I hope that you have enjoyed this little tale. Peridot definitely went through some stuff before she came to me, but I love her dearly, and I wouldn't change anything for the world. She's my constant companion, and yeah, I love her a lot. Either way, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening to my story and listening to me ramble on about my cat. It's been a pleasure. I hope you tune in next time. Bye. Hey guys, one more thing before I go. So I have talked in the past about selling my prints, and I am very excited to let you know that I am in the process of getting a store up and running so that I can actually do that. I'm hoping to have this completed by the end of next week at the very latest, and included in the first round of prints are going to be this piece, which I named Cozy Scarf, the sketch version of Something Witchy This Way Comes, the full color version of Something Witchy This Way Comes, and a brand new design that nobody has seen before. So I'm very, very excited. I do not know if I'm going to be printing these again or not, so keep your eye out for the announcement here on YouTube and over on my Twitter for when the store is up so that you can snag yours. Thank you so much, guys, for your continued support. Have a great day.